The first crack in my life was not a sound. It was a color. It was the exact shade of cobalt blue on a ceramic mug my wife, Clara, handed me one Tuesday morning. "Here you go, my love," she said, her voice a soft, familiar melody. "Your favorite." I took the mug, the warmth seeping into my palms. I looked down at the rich, dark blue glaze, and I knew, with a certainty that felt like a sudden, silent plunge into cold water, that I hated it. My favorite color had been orange, a loud, obnoxious sunset orange, the color of traffic cones and life vests, and the lining of a jacket I'd worn until the sleeves frayed. I had loved its insistence. Clara had called it energetic when we first met. Then, over the years, she'd gently steered me towards more mature, grounded tones: navy, charcoal, olive. She'd buy me sweaters in these colors, praising how they brought out my eyes. And I, flattered by her attention, by the way she curated my very being, I had agreed. I had let the orange fade from my world until it was a forgotten, childish thing. But that morning, the blue felt like a lie. It felt like a uniform for a man I'd been conscripted to play. I am 37 years old. I have been married to Clara for 12 years. There has been no cheating, no screaming fights, no bruises. There is no gallery of evidence to present to a concerned friend, which is why it took me over a decade to understand that I was the subject of a quiet, meticulous, and loving renovation. My soul was being gentrified. I remember the man Clara said she fell in love with. I remember him like a character from a favorite book, someone I once knew intimately, but whose story I hadn't picked up in years. He was spontaneous. He'd see a cheap flight to Lisbon and book it for the following weekend, just for the thrill of getting lost. His apartment was a glorious chaos of books stacked on chairs, records spilled from their sleeves, and a half-finished painting of a dragon he'd started on a whim. He was messy. He was impulsive. He had strong, often unpopular opinions about films and politics and the best way to make a grilled cheese sandwich. "You're so alive," Clara had whispered to me once, her head on my chest, after I'd dragged her to a midnight screening of a terrible horror movie just because I'd liked the poster. "You make me feel like I've been living in black and white." Her attention was a drug. She was the most attentive person I had ever met. She didn't just listen, she absorbed. She remembered the name of my first-grade teacher, the model of my childhood bicycle, the way I'd described the taste of a specific brand of root beer I'd had at a county fair when I was 14. I had told her these things once, in passing, as fragments of a life I assumed was unremarkable. She collected them. She built an archive of me. I thought it was the most profound form of love. I thought I was being seen, truly seen, for the first time. The changes began so subtly they were almost imperceptible, like the slow turning of the seasons. "You know, you have such a strong jawline," she'd murmur, running a finger along it. "These softer collars don't do you any favors. A sharper cut would look so powerful on you." And the comfortable, slightly rumpled shirts I loved began to disappear from my closet, replaced by structured cottons and crisp linens. "That friend of yours, Mark, he's so loud, isn't he? He seems to drain you. You're so much more relaxed, so much more yourself when it's just us." And without any dramatic falling out, My calls with Mark became less frequent, the invitations dried up, and the space he occupied in my life was quietly, painlessly filled with the serene presence of Clara. She had an uncanny ability to reframe my own experiences back to me. Her version always more polished, more insightful than my own messy reality. "That movie we saw was so pretentious, wasn't it?" she'd say about a film I'd professed to love just days before. I think I liked it? I'd venture, a flicker of confusion in my chest. "Oh, darling," she'd smile, a gentle, pitying smile. "You spent the whole time sighing. You said during the credits that it was all style and no substance. Don't you remember?" And I would try to remember. The memory would be fuzzy, the conversation lost in the haze of a normal evening. She was so certain. She remembered everything. It was easier, kinder, to believe her version than to cling to my own unreliable recollection. "You've always been so ambivalent about having children," she stated one night as we were discussing a friend's pregnancy. "You said you love the freedom we have too much." I had a distinct, sharp memory of a conversation early in our relationship, sitting on a beach, talking about wanting a big family, a house full of noise and chaos. The memory was so vivid I could feel the cool sand between my toes. But when I opened my mouth to remind her, I saw her face, calm, serene, utterly convinced of her truth. And the memory wavered like a reflection in disturbed water. Was I misremembering? Was I conflating a dream with reality? Memory is fragile when someone who loves you confidently rewrites it. It's not a mallet that shatters it. It's the constant, dripping water of a loving correction that wears it away. The world outside our home began to feel distant and distorted. My sister, Lena, would call. "You've been so quiet," she'd say. "Is everything okay? You seem different." When I told Clara, she'd look at me with tender concern. "She's just projecting, my love. She's unhappy in her own marriage, and she can't stand to see how happy we are. It's a classic dynamic." And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Our life was peaceful. Our home was a sanctuary of calm and order. There was no drama, no conflict, just a gentle, steady narrowing of the walls padded with her absolute certainty. The moment the foundation split open was a Tuesday, just like the blue mug. It was an email from Lena. The subject line was, "Ha! Found this gem." Attached was a video file. With a curious smile, I clicked it. The video was grainy, shot on an old phone. It was my 25th birthday, a decade before Clara. The room was packed with people, the air thick with smoke and laughter. And there I was. Or rather, there he was. He was drunk, his face flushed, his arms thrown around the shoulders of friends I barely remembered. He was loud. He was telling a rambling, animated story about wanting to buy a van and drive across South America, about starting a business, building custom motorcycles, about living anywhere that feels wrong but exciting. He was gesticulating wildly, his eyes blazing with a chaotic, unrefined passion. He was messy, he was impulsive, he was orange. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was like watching a stranger, a fascinating, vibrant, alien stranger. A deep, unsettling ache spread through my chest, a feeling of loss so profound it left me breathless. Where had he gone? That evening, after dinner, I took my phone to Clara. "Look what Lena sent," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "For my 25th birthday." She took the phone, her expression one of mild interest. She watched the minute-long clip, her face a placid mask. When it ended, she handed the phone back to me. "Oh, my love," she said, her voice soft with compassion. "You were so insecure back then. It's a little hard to watch. You were always pretending to be so much bigger and wilder than you really were. You were trying on personalities, looking for one that fit. It's why I fell in love with you later. I saw the real you hiding underneath all that noise." Pretending. The word landed like a verdict. It was her final, masterful edit. My past self wasn't real. He was an affectation. The man in the video wasn't the raw material. He was the flawed prototype before her careful refinement. That night, I lay in our king-sized bed in our tastefully beige bedroom, and I couldn't sleep. The fear wasn't of Clara. She was sleeping peacefully beside me, her breathing even and calm. The terror was of the emptiness inside me. If that passionate, chaotic young man was a pretender, and the calm, collected man lying in this bed was her creation, then who was I? I was a ghost in my own life, a tenant in a personality designed by someone else. A cold, clear resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. I had to test the walls of my museum. The next day, I went to a grocery store she never visited and bought a jar of spicy dill pickles. I knew Clara disliked them. She said the smell was vulgar. That evening, I took them out of the fridge and placed them on the table beside my plate.
Clara looked at the jar, then at me. Her smile was slightly puzzled. "What are those for, sweetheart?" "I felt like having pickles," I said, popping the lid. The sharp, vinegary scent filled the air. "But you don't like pickles," she said, her tone light, factual. "I think I do," I said, and took a bite. The crunch was deafening in the quiet room. She didn't get angry. She didn't scoff. She looked distressed. A tiny furrow appeared between her brows. It was the look you'd give a beloved dog that had suddenly started walking on its hind legs and quoting Shakespeare, a mixture of confusion and deep, profound unease. "You're being silly," she said, but her voice was faint. "You've always hated the texture." Another time, I deliberately misremembered the plot of a movie we'd seen together the previous week. I insisted the main character had died at the end. "No, no, darling," she said, her distress more palpable this time. "He moved to the country to open a bookstore. Don't you remember? We talked about how peaceful it sounded." Her eyes were wide, almost pleading. She wasn't correcting a fact. She was frantically trying to glue a piece of her reality back into place. I was changing the routines without explanation. I went for a run at night instead of in the morning. I started listening to a podcast about chaos theory, the volume just loud enough for her to hear its dissonant themes through my headphones. Each time, her reaction was the same, a quiet, deeply personal distress. It wasn't the anger of a controller whose orders were being defied. It was the panic of a curator watching a priceless, static exhibit suddenly come to life and try to leave its pedestal. She didn't want to control me. She wanted consistency. She was obsessed with the fixed, preserved version of me she had built inside her head. My spontaneous actions weren't acts of defiance. They were glitches in her masterpiece. And with every glitch, she looked more frightened. The breaking point. The moment I knew I had to leave or be erased completely was a conversation about a job.
A former colleague, someone from my before life, had reached out. He was starting a new tech firm in a city 3 hours away. He needed a lead project manager for a 6-month contract. The work was exciting, chaotic, and perfectly suited to the skills I'd once had. The skills Clara had convinced me were unfocused. I told her about it over a perfectly cooked salmon fillet. "It sounds like a great opportunity," I said, my heart thudding. "I'm thinking of taking it. I could get an apartment there during the week, come home on weekends." Clara put her fork down. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply looked at me, her eyes deep pools of pity. "You can't go," she said, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper. "That's not who you are." The sentence hung in the air between us, simple and absolute. It wasn't, "I don't want you to go." It was a statement of fact, delivered with the calm authority of a God defining their creation. "You can't go. That's not who you are." The terror I felt in that moment was colder and sharper than any fear I had ever known. It was the terror of ontological annihilation. She wasn't just telling me what to do. She was telling me what I was. And in her world, her word was law. I moved out 2 weeks later. The process was quiet, surreal. There were no screaming matches, no thrown dishes. It was like I was carefully, politely excising myself from a living organism. Clara was heartbroken, but her grief was that of a woman who had lost a precious, inanimate object. She kept asking, "Why are you doing this? Why are you being so unlike yourself?" I took a small apartment in the new city. The silence was deafening. It wasn't the peaceful silence of our marital home. It was a void, an empty canvas, and I had no idea what to paint on it.
She still writes to me. Long, meticulously composed emails. They are not love letters, nor are they pleas to return. They are curatorial notes. "You're confused now, my love. You're going through a phase of rebellion because you're scared of the success we've built. You've always been scared of true happiness. You told me that once. You'll remember soon. You'll come back to yourself." By yourself, she means him. The man in the museum. The man she designed. And the hardest part, the part that claws at me in the dead of night, is that I still don't fully trust my own memory. I still hear her voice, her calm, certain cadence when I make a choice. "You don't like that. You've always preferred this. That's not who you are." Obsession doesn't always look like chains. Sometimes it looks like a love that quietly, tenderly edits you until there's almost nothing left to recognize. I had escaped the museum, but I was standing outside, shivering in the cold, unable to remember what my own skin felt like. The revenge, when it came, was not something I had planned. It was an archaeological dig into my own soul, and I was about to find the first crucial artifact. My new apartment was a white box, beige carpet, off-white walls, a blank slate that reflected the hollowed-out state of my own interior. I'd brought only the essentials, and even those felt like artifacts from a civilization I no longer understood. The first few weeks were a study in silence and
disorientation. I'd wake up and, for a fleeting moment, expect to smell Clara's specific blend of jasmine tea and lemon cleaner. Instead, there was only the sterile scent of a space no one had yet lived in. The job was a baptism by fire. My colleague Ben was a whirlwind of ideas and half-finished sentences, a stark contrast to Clara's composed certainty. He threw problems at me like fastballs, and I fumbled, my instincts dulled by years of seeking approval for every minor decision. "You're overthinking it, man," Ben would say, clapping me on the shoulder. "Just go with your gut. The old you would have had a solution in 5 seconds." The old you. The phrase was a ghost, haunting me. Who was the old me? Was he the loud, ambitious kid in the video? Or was he the calm, collected husband Clara had crafted? Or was he someone else entirely? Someone lost in the interstitial spaces between their versions? I started the excavation slowly, timidly. I went to a supermarket and stood in the cereal aisle for 20 minutes, paralyzed. Clara had always bought a specific, high-fiber, low-sugar brand. It was our cereal. But what did I like? I remembered, as a boy, loving a brand that was essentially candy masquerading as food, with a bright neon marshmallow mascot on the box. I reached for it, my hand trembling slightly, half expecting a gentle correction from behind me. None came. The box felt alien in my cart, a contraband item. That night, I ate a bowl. It was disgustingly sweet, the synthetic colors bleeding into the milk. I hated it. And the realization was a burst of pure, unadulterated joy. I had formed my own opinion, based on my own sensory input. It was a tiny, insignificant data point, but it was mine. I began to conduct more experiments. I rented movies Clara had deemed unwatchable and found, to my surprise, that I loved their messy, ambitious failures. I listened to the loud, aggressive music of my youth, and while it no longer resonated with the man I was now, it didn't feel like a pretension. It felt like a history. The most profound tests were with memory. I started a journal, a private one she would never see. I would pick a childhood memory and write it down in as much detail as I could, consciously ignoring Clara's annotated versions. Memory. The summer I was 10, I tried to build a tree house with my friend Leo. We stole wood from a construction site, nailed it together haphazardly, and it collapsed the first time we both climbed in. I broke my arm. Clara's annotation. "You've always been cautious. You said that fall taught you a valuable lesson about planning and not taking foolish risks." My raw recall. The thrill of the theft, the smell of sawdust and sweat, the glorious, terrifying crack of the wood. The pain was sharp, but the adventure was real. Lying in the grass, waiting for the ambulance, Leo and I laughed hysterically because it had been the best day ever.
Writing it down was an act of rebellion. It was me reclaiming the copyright to my own life. One Saturday, digging through a box of old tax documents I'd brought out of a vague sense of responsibility, I found it, an artifact. It was a small, leather-bound notebook, its covers scuffed and soft with age. I didn't recognize it at first. I flipped it open. The pages were filled with my own handwriting, a rushed, energetic scrawl from another lifetime. Sketches of motorcycle engines, lyrics to terrible songs I'd tried to write, ideas for businesses, a subscription service for rare hot sauces, an app that maps the most confusing, labyrinthine routes through a city just for the fun of getting lost, a travel company that only books you a flight to the airport and the first night's lodging, you figure out the rest. There were lists. Places to see, Petro, the Silk Road, Antarctica, that bar in Tokyo that only seats 3 people. Skills to learn, blacksmithing, Japanese, how to fly a helicopter. Rules to live by. 1. Say yes more than no. 2. If it scares you, it's probably worth doing. 3. Comfort is the enemy. I sat on the floor of my beige apartment, surrounded by filing folders, and read the entire thing. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't the pretentious, insecure boy Clara had described. This was someone with a voracious appetite for life. Someone who embraced the messy, unpredictable, and thrilling nature of existence. He was naive, yes. He was overly optimistic, certainly. But he was real. And Clara hadn't just edited him. She had systematically dismantled every one of his principles and labeled the rubble maturity. A cold fury began to burn in my chest, a clean, focused flame unlike any emotion I'd felt in years. It wasn't a rage at Clara, not yet. It was rage at myself for allowing this to happen, for surrendering so willingly. The why of it was still a mystery, but I now had proof of the what. I had been the subject of a silent, bloodless coup, and I had handed the revolutionaries the keys to the city with a grateful smile.
The emails from Clara continued, their tone shifting from concerned to condescending. I understand you need to play act at being someone else for a while. It's a common reaction to midlife anxiety, but the charade must be getting tiresome. This project of yours, this new city, it's so unlike you. You've always valued stability over novelty. You told me the story of the treehouse, how it taught you that real happiness is found in safe, well-constructed plans. I read that line about the treehouse, and I looked at the journal open on my desk. The lie was so brazen, so perfectly engineered to supplant my actual joyful memory with one of caution and fear. It was psychological forgery. I didn't reply. The fury was crystallizing into a plan. Not a plan of confrontation, not yet. A plan of reclamation. My revenge would not be against Clara. How do you take revenge on someone for loving you in a way that suffocates you? My revenge would be against her narrative. I would prove her wrong. Not by arguing with her, but by becoming so unequivocally, authentically myself that her carefully constructed version would shatter against the reality of me. It started with the job. I stopped asking Ben for his opinion on every minor decision. I started trusting the flickers of intuition that remained. I proposed a risky, unorthodox marketing strategy for our launch, one that involved a high-profile, chaotic public event. It was the kind of idea from my old notebook. Ben loved it. Now that's the guy I remember. He boomed. The event was a stressful, beautiful mess. Things went wrong. Last-minute changes were needed. I thrived on it. The chaos wasn't something to be managed and eliminated. It was a creative force. I felt a long, dormant part of my brain crackle to life. I began to rebuild a social life not based on who Clara thought I should be with, but on who I genuinely enjoyed. I met a photographer named Daniel who loved arguing about movies. I had a beer with a software engineer named Maria who was planning to quit her job and hike the Pacific Crest Trail. Our conversations were loud, meandering, and full of disagreements that ended in laughter. No one corrected my memories. No one told me who I was. I bought a bright orange sweater.
I wore it on a video call with my sister, Lena. There was a long silence on her end of the line. Then her eyes filled with tears. "Oh my God," she whispered. "There you are." It was the final piece of external validation I needed. I wasn't crazy. The change had been real, and others had seen it. One evening, I was feeling particularly bold. I opened my laptop and opened a new email to Clara. I didn't address her curatorial notes. I didn't try to defend myself or my choices. I simply began to write. I wrote about my day. I wrote about the messy, successful event. I wrote about the spicy noodles I'd had for lunch from a food truck and how much I'd enjoyed them, even though they'd given me heartburn. I wrote about the treehouse, the real memory, the theft, the collapse, the broken bone, the glorious, foolish joy of it. I was not trying to convince her. I was testifying. I was bearing witness to my own existence, separate from her. I was planting my flag in the soil of my own life. Her reply came swiftly, within the hour. It was shorter than usual. "I don't know who you're trying to be in these emails, but it's sad to watch this performative chaos, this orange. It's a costume. The man I love is secure and steady. He's waiting for you to stop this nonsense and come home." I read it, and for the first time, I didn't feel a flicker of doubt. I felt a surge of power. Her words no longer had the power to define me. They were just words, the desperate incantations of a curator whose most prized exhibit had walked out of the museum. The excavation was complete. I had dug through the layers of her revisions and found the bedrock of my own soul. It was scarred, and it was confused, but it was mine. Now it was time to build something new upon it. The real work was about to begin. The next 6 months were the most turbulent and rewarding of my life. It was like rehabilitating a muscle that had atrophied from disuse, the muscle of me. There were setbacks, moments of profound loneliness in my apartment, where Clara's voice would whisper, "You're happier when you're home with me, don't you think?" And for a terrifying moment, I would believe it. The peace she offered was a siren's call, a seductive promise of an end to the struggle.
But I had my artifacts now. The journal, the orange sweater, the memory of thriving in chaos at work. I would hold on to them like talismans until the whisper passed. I started therapy. I needed a professional guide to help me navigate the psychological minefield Clara had left behind. Dr. Evans was a quiet man with a kind, steady gaze. "What you're describing is a form of coercive control," he said in one of our early sessions. "It's often misunderstood because it lacks the classic markers of abuse. There's no violence, no shouting. It's a parasite that attaches to your own mind and uses your trust, your love, as its host. She wasn't just telling you what to do, she was telling you who you were. And by believing her, you handed over your identity." Hearing it framed in clinical terms was both horrifying and vindicating. I wasn't weak. I had been the victim of a sophisticated, insidious psychological process. "The path forward isn't about defeating her," Dr. Evans continued. "It's about continuing what you've started. You are gathering evidence of your own existence. Every preference you state, every memory you reclaim, every decision you make without consulting her ghost is a victory." So I leaned into the victories. I let my new apartment become messy. Books piled up on the floor, a half-finished model airplane sat on the coffee table.
I played music loudly and sang along off-key. I dated. It was awkward and strange. I went out with a woman named Chloe, a graphic designer with a lightning-quick wit and a tattoo of a galaxy on her forearm. She was nothing like Clara. On our third date, she argued passionately with me about the merits of a film I loved. She didn't try to correct my memory. She presented her own perspective, fiercely and intelligently. It was a conversation, not a correction. It was exhilarating. I didn't tell her about Clara. Not yet. This new life, this fledgling self, was too fragile to be contextualized by the old one.
Meanwhile, Clara's emails became less frequent, but more strident. They were no longer concerned notes from a loving wife. They were the manifestos of a leader whose revolution was failing. This rebellion is beneath you. The man I married would be embarrassed by this midlife crisis. The dyed hair, the loud music, the casual dating. It's a cliché. You're a cliché. Come home and we can fix this. We can get you back to yourself. Back to yourself. The phrase had lost all its power. It was an empty slogan. I finally understood the karmic justice that was unfolding. Clara's obsession was her own prison. She was trapped in a museum of her own creation, desperately polishing a statue that no longer existed. Her reality, which had once felt so solid and imposing to me, was brittle. My every independent action was a crack in its foundation. My happiness was her downfall. The true climax, the moment of catharsis, arrived unexpectedly. My 6-month contract was being converted to a permanent position. Ben and the team wanted to throw me a party. A proper welcome back, he said. It was to be at a noisy, crowded bar with a terrible cover band, the kind of place Clara would have hated. The night of the party, I felt good. I felt solid. I was wearing the orange sweater. I was laughing, really laughing, with Daniel and Maria, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lena. "Call me when you get a sec. It's important." A sliver of old anxiety pierced my mood. I excused myself and stepped out into the cool night air. "Hey, Lena. Everything okay?" Her voice was tense. I just got off the phone with Clara. My body went cold. What? Why was she calling you? She found out about your party. I don't know how. She asked me if I was going. I said yes, and then she just unloaded. Lena took a shaky breath. She said you were having a public breakdown, that you were surrounded by enablers, and that this party was a spectacle. She told me I had a responsibility as your sister to intervene, to talk some sense into you. She was crying, but, Mark, it was the strangest thing. The things she was saying about you, they weren't about you. They were about some fictional character. She said you'd become aggressively mediocre and were chasing a youth you never actually had. She said you'd developed a fear of success and were sabotaging your career. I leaned against the brick wall of the bar. The sounds of the bad cover band muffled through the door. I wasn't angry. I was clear. This was it. This was the final desperate act of the curator. She was trying to recruit my own family to her cause, to reinforce her narrative from the outside. "What did you say to her?" I asked, my voice quiet. She told her to go to hell, Lena said with a fierce pride in her tone. I told her the man at this party is the brother I remember. I told you we're finally happy. And then she said the most chilling thing. What? She said, "That's not happiness, Lena. That's amnesia. And he'll remember who he is when this all comes crashing down."
Amnesia. The final, perfect edit. In her reality, my true self was the one she had built, and my current life was a fugue state, a temporary insanity. I thanked Lena, told her I loved her, and went back inside the bar. The noise and the light hit me like a wave. But I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt anchored. I looked around at the faces of my friends, my colleagues. They saw me, not a version of me, me. The messy, impulsive, sometimes foolish, but authentically alive me. I walked over to the bar, bought a shot of a terrible, cheap tequila I would never have drunk in my old life, and knocked it back. The burn felt like a purification. Later that night, back in my messy, lived-in apartment, I opened my laptop one last time. I opened a new email to Clara. This would be my final communication, my declaration of independence. Clara, I began. No, my love, no, darling. I received your message to Lena. I understand now, more clearly than ever, what you have been trying to do for the last 12 years. You were not trying to love me. You were trying to create me. The man you fell in love with, the spontaneous, messy, impulsive man, was real. You didn't find the real me hiding underneath. You systematically dismantled him because he didn't fit the static, perfect image you needed to love. You collected the pieces of me that you liked and discarded the rest. You weren't in love with a person. You were in love with a concept, a fixed, immutable idea that could never challenge you, never change, never grow. You say I have amnesia. You are wrong. For 12 years I had amnesia. I forgot who I was. Now I am remembering. The man I am today is not a rebellion. He is a restoration. He is not a phase. He is a return. He likes spicy food and loud music and the color orange. He thrives on chaos and values the messy, unpredictable journey over the safe, predictable destination. He has opinions you would dislike and memories you would contradict. He is imperfect and flawed and entirely his own. Do not write to me again. Do not contact my family. The man you are waiting for, the man you designed, does not exist. He never did. He was a ghost, and I will no longer haunt your museum. I am finally and completely home. Mark.
I read it over once, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with a fierce, clean certainty. I clicked send. There was no immediate reply. There was no dramatic finale. There was only silence. A true, clean silence. The silence of a story that has reached its end. The karma was not her humiliation or her pain. The karma was her solitude. She was left alone with her perfect empty museum, while the living, breathing subject of her obsession was finally, joyfully free. The silence after I sent that email was different from any I had known before. It wasn't the void of my first weeks in the apartment, nor was it the pressurized quiet of my marriage. This was a fertile silence. It was the quiet of a field after a fire, rich with the promise of new growth. Clara did not respond. No long email, no desperate phone call. My words had been a final, definitive door closing, and the click of the lock was the only sound. I had finally spoken in a voice she could not edit, a narrative she could not control. I had presented her with a reality she could not assimilate, and so her only option was to ignore it.
to pretend it didn't exist. It was the ultimate and only defeat she could ever acknowledge. The months that followed were a process of building, not just discovering. I wasn't just unearthing an old self, I was constructing a new one, informed by the past, but not bound by it. The boy in the journal was a foundation, but the man I was now had 12 more years of life etched into him, years that included the profound lesson of how easily a self can be lost. I didn't throw out all the changes. I kept the preference for structured shirts, not because Clara said they looked better, but because I, Mark, had decided I liked the way they felt. I maintained a sense of order in my finances, not out of fear of risk, but as a strategic choice to enable future adventures. I was no longer reactive. I was proactive. Every choice was mine. My relationship with Chloe deepened. One evening, over a bottle of wine in my messy apartment, I told her about Clara. I told her the whole story. The collection, the gentle corrections, the museum, the excavation. I showed her the journal. She listened, her galaxy-tattooed arm resting on the table, her expression of intense, quiet focus.
When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. "That is the most terrifying love story I have ever heard," she said softly. "I'm so sorry that happened to you." There was no pity in her voice. There was solidarity. And in that moment, I felt the last lingering ghost of Clara's voice, the one that whispered, "No one will ever understand you like I do," dissipate into nothing. It was a lie. Understanding did not require control. True intimacy was about witnessing another person's reality, not writing it for them. A year to the day after I moved out, I was in my office, sketching out plans for a genuinely risky but exciting new project, when an email notification popped up. The sender was Clara's sister, Rebecca. My blood ran cold. We had never been close, and I couldn't imagine why she would be contacting me now. With a sense of trepidation, I opened it. "Mark," it began. "I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing to you with a heavy heart and with no small amount of guilt. Clara is not well. She checked herself into a residential program for anxiety and OCD a few months ago. In her therapy, she has begun to confront some of the issues that plagued your marriage. She has given me permission to write to you, not to ask for anything, but to share something she felt you deserved to know. She called it a missing piece of your story. Before she met you, Clara was in a relationship with a man named Thomas. It was a volatile, chaotic 5 years. He was an artist, brilliant, passionate, and utterly unreliable. He would swear undying love one day and disappear for weeks the next. He was spontaneous to the point of cruelty. He broke promises. He forgot birthdays. He left her waiting in restaurants for hours. He broke her heart repeatedly, and each time she took him back, hoping he would change, hoping he would become the stable, reliable man she knew he could be. He finally left her for good, without a word, 2 months before she met you.
She saw in you, Mark, everything she had ever wanted Thomas to be. The energy, the passion, the spontaneity, but she also saw the potential for the same chaos. She was so terrified of losing you, of being hurt again, that she preemptively stabilized you.
She tried to sand down the very edges she had been so drawn to, convinced that if she could just make you a little less like Thomas, she could keep you safe, keep you hers. It started as a defense mechanism, a way to manage her own terror, but it became an obsession. She convinced herself that the man she was helping you become was the real you, and that your past self was just a rough draft. She asked me to tell you that she is sorry, not for the person she tried to make you, but for being too broken herself to love the person you actually were. She understands now that love is not a renovation project. You owe her no reply. I just thought you should have the full picture. Wishing you all the best. Rebecca. I sat back in my chair, the hum of my computer being the only sound. I read the email 3 times, and I felt nothing at first. Then a profound, overwhelming sense of closure. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was understanding. The mystery was solved. The why was no longer a gaping hole in my story. Clara hadn't been a monster. She had been a wounded person, trying to solve the equation of her past trauma using me as a variable. Her obsession wasn't about me. It was about him, Thomas. I had just been the clay. Knowing that didn't erase the damage, but it contextualized it. It humanized her, and in doing so, it finally completely released me. The last vestige of anger dissolved, replaced by a quiet, distant pity. I deleted the email. I did not need to keep this artifact. The story was over.
That weekend, I was at a street fair with Chloe. The sun was bright, the air filled with the smells of frying dough and sounds of a brass band. We were wandering, aimlessly, happily. We stopped at a stall selling vintage posters. I was sifting through them when I saw it. A faded, slightly torn travel poster for Portugal. It was a wild, dramatic coastline, all crashing waves and soaring cliffs. The kind of place that felt both wrong and exciting. On a whim, I bought it. Back at my apartment, I cleared a space on the wall, right in the center of the main room. I hammered in a nail and hung the poster. The vibrant, chaotic image looked perfectly at home, amidst the messy books, the half-finished model, the bright orange sweater thrown over a chair. I stepped back and looked at it. I felt no urge to book a flight, no impulsive need to run away. That wasn't the point anymore. The point was that it was a possibility. It was a statement of intent. It was a part of me, hanging on my wall because I wanted it there. Chloe came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist and resting her chin on my shoulder. "I like it," she said. "It's got energy." I leaned back into her, feeling the solid, warm reality of her. I looked at the poster, then around my messy, lived-in, vibrant apartment. I looked at my own reflection and the dark screen of the television. The eyes that looked back were mine. They were 38 years old. They had known peace and terror, loss and reclamation. They were not the blazing, naive eyes of the 25-year-old in the video, nor were they the calm, placid eyes of the husband in the museum. They were something new, something forged. Obsession had tried to edit me. Love had tried to save me from a ghost. But in the end, I had done the one thing Clara, in her brokenness, could never have anticipated. I had chosen to rewrite myself. And the story, finally, was my own. What's the most insidious form of control you've ever witnessed? The kind that masquerades as love?